So what do makers and designers really make in their business? A couple years ago, I was seeing income reports all over the place from coaches and consultants, and I started to wonder, what would a income report look like from a handmade business? Welcome to Explore Your Enthusiasm, episode 146 with me, Tara Swiger. Today we are going to talk about what happened when I decided to get income reports from makers and artists and designers. So 2 years ago, in 2015, after seeing tons of income reports from bloggers and coaches, I started to realize that a lot of my students who were makers and artists were looking at these income reports and comparing their businesses and how well they were doing to what people who have totally different business models, what they were doing in their business. And it worried me for two reasons. The first is that your handmade business, whether you're a designer and you sell like PDFs or patterns, or whether you are a maker and you sell an actual physical good, or you're an artist and you sell prints, your business is not comparable to other kinds of business models. So you know that it's a different kind of business model than if you have a retail shop, right? That's obvious, but sometimes we forget that it's also a different business model for many of the people who are teaching you classes. So a coach, a consultant, a teacher like I am, an author, I have a totally different business model than you do, which is why it's not helpful if I tell you how my business model is working for me. Right? Because it's completely different and not comparable. We're going to have different expenses, we're going to have a different profit margin, and we're going to need to make a different level of sales in order to reach our goals. Now, it's also not comparable because everybody has different goals and is trying to create different things. The second reason, though, why it distresses me when makers and artists look at the income reports of people with totally different business models is actually not that useful to know what one kind of superstar of a person is doing in their business. Somebody who is really big and has a giant audience and has 1 million email subscribers. I don't find that as useful or as interesting as to know what other people who have been in business for about the same amount of time as you, or who sell a similar product, what they're doing. I think it's much more useful to know what a variety of people are doing and what's working than just to know what one person is doing. Even if it was directly comparable, people are different. They want different things. They spend their time in different ways. They have different skills and abilities. And I find it more useful to look at a whole bunch of information than just one single data point. So what I did in 2015 is I created a survey where you could share your numbers and your feelings totally anonymously. You could tell me what you make, what your expenses are, how long you've been working on your business, and then how you felt about those numbers and what things you've tried that worked, things you've tried that haven't worked. And what I did in a series of blog posts, which you can go back and find, I'll make sure and link to in the show notes. What we did is we shared those responses. I decided that the easiest way to share it, there were over 100, I think close to 200 responses. What I did was I broke them up. First of all, I realized that there were two main areas. One was designers who sell patterns, and one group was makers who sell a product. So we split them up, and then I looked at the average. Not the average, the majority. What did the majority of people, where were their answers? And then who was on the low end and who was on the high end? And when I say who, all of this was anonymous, but I shared the specific answers and case studies from someone on the low end and someone on the high end, and then a couple that represented the majority, which might not necessarily be in the middle of the low and the high. So it's not really an average, but just to show you what most people were saying. And it's not the numbers that are so interesting, but the answers to the questions like what's working for you, what's not working for you, what's your goal in your business, and how do you feel like you're doing towards that goal. Reading those answers were so super helpful to me, to my readers and my listeners, that I want to do that again. And actually, people have been asking me if I would do this every year annually. And in 2016, it just didn't fit in with my schedule, but I'm doing it now. And I'm doing it leading up to the tax season. So hopefully you have your numbers handy. So you can fill it out totally anonymously at taraswiger.com/income and share your feelings and your numbers and the lessons you're learning, not with me, but also with my readers. So keep in mind that if you fill that out, only put the information on there that you would want shared. obviously there's like no place for you to put your email address or your name, so you're going to remain anonymous, but just think about the details that you share and how comfortable you are sharing those details. So that's tarswiger.com/income. And if you want to find the links to that and everything else we talk here along with this transcript, you can go to tarswiger.com/podcast146. So today I wanted to share what I learned by looking at all those numbers and feelings and reflections of all of those makers and designers. So the first thing is that many businesses and people who specifically mark this as a business and not just a hobby. So it's one of the questions on the survey is you can choose if you're a business or a hobby, and I'm just going to share the numbers that are from businesses. But many of them who filled out my survey had absolutely no idea what their numbers were in a single month. I got so many messages from makers who wanted to fill it out, but didn't because they couldn't, because they hadn't done the math and they didn't know what their numbers were, and they didn't even know what the terms meant. So when I talk about total revenue, and then I went back and edited it and put in parentheses all of the money your business took in this month, they didn't know what that was, and they didn't know what to measure. There was just a financial illiteracy in the community that is very troubling. If you consider your thing as a business, you need to know these numbers and be able to find them. So the reason why it's so troubling is not because it matters if you can talk with a banker about your business, but you can't know what you need to do in your business if you don't know how to measure what you're doing. If you have no idea if you're making progress or not making progress, if you have no idea what your expenses are, you're not going to be able to fix things. And what I hear from so many people is they're frustrated that their business isn't paying themselves. But if you don't know what your income is and you don't know what your expenses are, there's no way you ever can pay yourself because you're never going to know if it's safe to or not. So I have a video where I share the very beginnings of how to track your numbers, and I'm going to link to it in the show notes. I'll share more with you there. And I have a class coming up that it's going to reopen in April called Pay Yourself, where I'll teach you how to do that. And had no plan to open the class, except for so many of you have asked for it in another survey I did at the beginning of the year where I asked you to share your feedback and what you wanted to see from me. So many of you wanted that class on how to track your numbers. I'm going to reopen that class, but I'll tell you about it here on the podcast when it gets closer. But that was the number one thing I realized is how many businesses had no idea what to do with their numbers. The second thing I learned is that many makers don't actually know what they want. So I asked in the survey, how do you feel after answering these questions? And the answers ranged from totally depressed to completely freaked out to, oh my goodness, I'm so excited. And that's perfectly normal to feel a whole range of feelings. I feel that way every week in my business. Depressed, scared, excited, thrilled. That's just part of being an entrepreneur and building something totally and completely new and doing it on your own. But what stood out to me was the number of people who filled in the answers who said that they didn't know how to feel about it. They were like, should I feel good about this or should I feel bad about this? I don't know what it means. They have no idea what their numbers mean for their businesses or for the health of their business. And that makes sense because numbers don't mean anything on their own. So I get asked all the time, the class Pay Yourself is available inside the Starship. And so Starship captains have been going through Pay Yourself for the past several years. And they'll always say, I found out my profit margin is this, or it's a percentage of this, or my income was this. Is that good or bad? No one knows. The answer is neither or both. The answer is it depends on you and your context. Numbers alone don't mean anything without context. And if you don't know what you want from your business and what you're hoping to get out of your business, the numbers mean nothing. No one number has any meaning without the context. What I mean by context is knowing what the numbers mean in your business. So let's do an example. Let's say that yesterday you made $20. Good or bad? Half of you listening are going to be like, man, if I made $20 yesterday, I would be thrilled because maybe you sell a $5 product. So that means you sold 4 products. Or maybe you don't make a sale, but maybe once a month. So if you had a $20 sale yesterday, you would be delighted. The other half is listening and saying, oh my goodness, that would be a miserable day because maybe your goal is to make $2,000 a week, in which case a $20 day would not be moving you to that $2,000 a week at the right pace. Or maybe you sell a $500 product, so you couldn't even have a $20 day. So that's the thing. You have to know the context for your own business. It doesn't mean anything on its own. A $20 day is absolutely meaningless unless you know what you want out of your business and what the financial structure of your business is, what your business model is, and what your goals are. So the solution to this problem is to put your numbers in context. And this is something I say all the time. You need to get clear on what it is you want from your business by defining what success is. And you also need to get very clear and comfortable with the numbers that you have. So when you make a $20 sale, how much of that do you actually make? How much do you actually get to keep? So if you make a $20 sale, but the thing cost you $18 to make, then you made $2. That's an entirely different context than if the thing cost you $2 to make and you made $18 on it. So context is what matters when it comes to your numbers. You have to know what it means for you. I cannot tell you. There is not a profit margin that is good or bad except your business model. So an example is that, you guys know I've been looking at retail shops and specifically comic book shops lately. A healthy profit margin for a comic book shop is somewhere in between 10 and 15%. That's healthy and good and should be celebrated because your cost of goods sold is a 50% of your income. So right away, your profit margin could be no more than 50%, but then you have rent and then you have electricity and then you have marketing. So something in between 10 to 15% is considered healthy in the industry. In my business, teaching and writing and being an author and a speaker and a teacher that travels around and holds workshops, my profit margin is healthy if it's somewhere in between 70 to 80%. So can you see? The context is so important. If you don't know how your business model works, you don't know if your profit margin is healthy or if the amount of money your business is making makes sense for what your goals are. So I want you to get clear on what your goals are and then also understand how your business works, where the expenses are, what your profit margin is now, and maybe what's a healthy one for industry. Now, the third lesson I learned is that many makers feel disappointed and overwhelmed. Which isn't surprising either, because when you're starting a business, and starting can be anything in the first 5, 10, 20 years, when you're working on a business as an entrepreneur, there is a bunch of things to be disappointed about or overwhelmed by. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of trying things and a lot of things don't work. But now what I found interesting is that the disappointment and the overwhelm is not correlated to the income numbers. So what I'm saying is it doesn't matter if you're making $0 a month or $5,000 a month, you will still feel disappointed and overwhelmed from time to time. But what the numbers did seem correlated to was how much the respondent understood cause and effect in their own business. So what I mean by this is if a maker was measuring other numbers like their conversion or their email subscribers, they were less likely to say that they felt overwhelmed or depressed by their numbers. Because my theory is they're paying attention to how their business works. And when they increase one area, they know it's going to increase another area, even if it takes time. And also because when you're measuring a couple different things, you know what you can do to improve your numbers. If all you're measuring is sales, but you don't have an email list and you're not doing any marketing and you don't know what your expenses are, then you don't have any way of knowing what you could do. You don't have any way of measuring what you're doing versus the effect it's having. So someone who is measuring a couple different metrics tends to be, at least in my survey results, less overwhelmed or disappointed because they recognize that they have options and that they can experiment. They realize, oh, does increasing my email list increase my sales? Maybe does sending more or fewer messages or different messages increase my sales? The more kind of things you are doing and paying attention to, the more things you can experiment with, and it's like the more levers you have to pull in order to reach your goal. I have seen this to be true in so many of the businesses I've worked with. I know it's not just the survey results. The more that someone understands how all the pieces of their business work together to impact their sales and then their profit, the more choices they can make, the more options, the more things they can try, and really not being disappointed and overwhelmed comes down to knowing you have options. Your choices impact the health of your business. Your business is not just doing well or doing bad based on outside circumstances like the economy or the politics or if people want your product or not. It's doing poorly or it's doing beautifully based on the amount of work you're putting in and if you're pulling the right levers. And all of that is experimentation. So just understanding those variables that affect your sales and how you can experiment with those variables to increase sales, that can give you some sense of agency and ownership and keep you from feeling hopeless and like you have no control over anything. So that's the thing I realized. A lot of people are feeling overwhelmed and disappointed. There's a strong correlation between feeling in control and actually paying attention to some of the other metrics in your business, like email subscribers or Instagram followers or conversion rates or traffic. Now, when you focus in on what matters to your business, everything else becomes obvious. This is the fourth lesson I learned. The people who were paying attention to their goals and what they wanted had a much clearer vision about how to move forward. So several of your fellow listeners and readers wrote to me to say, after doing the numbers in your survey, I realized that I've been wasting my time worrying about X. Now, X is all of the things that should have nothing to do with the 4 important business foundations, all of the things you think you should do. So often when people do their numbers, either through my class or just the very basics that the survey asks you to do, they realize, holy crap, I've been spending my time on things that don't matter. I actually, since doing this survey and since talking more about profitability with people over the years, regularly get messages from people saying, I've been spending all of my time working on something. Then I defined success and I realized that has nothing to do with it. Why have I been wasting my time? So the lesson is when you focus in on what matters to you in your business, it's so much easier to make decisions. It's so much more obvious where you should be spending your time and where you should not be spending your time. Now, the fifth lesson I learned is that you are not alone. So whether you know what your numbers are, or whether you know what you want out of your business, or whether you just feel overwhelmed with thinking about it or figuring it out for the very first time, you are really, really, really not alone. There are makers who have been in business for 6 months or 6 years, and they haven't done these numbers yet. There are people who have made tons of money in their business, but don't have any idea how or what levers to pull or what to do next. So there are thousands of makers just like you, probably hundreds of thousands, but just listening to this podcast episode, there are hundreds of people who feel like how you feel, whether you are super excited and pumped up, or whether you are kind of disappointed, or whether you're overwhelmed, or whether you've been listening to me and you realized, holy crap, she's saying a lot of numbers that I have no idea what that is in my business. You are not alone. So the good news is this confusion and overwhelm can be totally overcome in a couple steps. 1, focus in on what you want and build a business based on that. Ignore all the shoulds. Focus on what matters in your business. The other thing is, remember, you don't have to feel like this forever. You can make decisions and you can make changes to change that for you. Now, I've worked with dozens of makers, at this point hundreds of makers, who feel a zillion times better about their businesses after doing their numbers. I have also worked with makers who feel worse after doing their numbers because they realize some stuff needed to be fixed. There were some broken bits and they needed to fix those broken bits. And I have seen people fix those broken bits in a lot of ways. They've upped their prices, they've decreased their expenses, they have changed their business models entirely, they've even changed what they sold entirely. Don't let that overwhelm you and think that's the only way to do it. There are a lot of little changes, and I actually created a class that would help you figure out all of this, your profit margins, your expenses, how to track it. And it is going to open up in April. So I just want you to keep your ear out for that. You can actually sign up to learn more right now at tarswiger.com/pay. And that page, if you're listening to this in the future, will eventually be where you can sign up for the class, pay yourself. Right now, what you'll get in the next couple weeks is an invitation to do this income report survey so we can all learn from each other. You'll also get my my own tracking template for the numbers I track, because it's not just sales, it's also conversions and email subscribers. And I'm also making a tutorial about my favorite software for tracking my numbers, and I'll show you what that is and how I use it. So you can find all of that if you sign up at tarswiger.com/pay, and you'll find links to everything I mentioned in the show notes, wherever you're listening to this, or at tarswiger.com/podcast 146. Also, if you're super interested in income reports, go fill out yours, tarswiger.com/income. And you can also listen to episode 56 of this podcast. I talk about how to learn lessons from other people's income reports. This was actually the research I was doing, the podcast I was recording that kicked off this whole idea. So I think in that episode, I mentioned the link to fill out the first income report. This was way back in May of 2015. So don't fill out that one. That's the old one. Fill out the new one at tarswiger.com/income. And, I am live streaming this on Instagram as I record it. And I just wanted you guys to know that someone posted that they're crying a little bit because it encourages them so much to know they're not alone. So if that's you, that's what I want you to take with this. There is a lot more you can learn about your business that will help you feel not so overwhelmed. But if you haven't done it yet, you're not alone. We're not built knowing this information. I didn't come into the world understanding profit margins. This is after years and years of learning and research and paying attention and experimenting. So that's what it's going to take from you. And that's okay. You can do it. We're going to do it together. We are going for the whole month of March 2017 to talk more about your numbers. I'm going to talk to you about profit margins. I'm going to share what the results are from this time's income report survey. So you got to remember to go and fill that out at tarswiger.com/income. But you'll hear a lot more about how to track your numbers, how to figure out your profit margins, all of that here on the podcast. So make sure you've subscribed in all the places. If you like it. If you're watching the YouTube video, or leave a review on iTunes. That helps other people. This would be a good episode to share with your friends, because we are talking about something that I know lots of you guys are concerned about and that a lot of people don't talk about very often. So share this with your friends if you're enjoying it. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a really super profitable and chill day filled with enthusiasm. Thanks so much.